We are session is January 3rd. Oh, we have a new calendar. So this morning I thought we would talk about priorities and then talk a little bit for each committee member, and then talk a little bit about with the governor's office about their priorities. And I would like to have perhaps Thursday conversation with the Attorney General's office about their priorities. I only have a couple of priorities, and one is to deal with a bill that will be coming soon to this committee on ghost guns. We ban them. The more we hear about them, the more I worry about them. Actually, I went down to my local sheriff's office just to meet with the new sheriff and talk with him about the upcoming session. And I mentioned ghost guns, and he said, "Oh, I've got one." He went into the evidence room and brought one back that they had picked up in Dorset that had been done with a 3D print. You know, there are also triggers that are now on some of them that can act just like a machine gun. And in that bill will also be a couple of Big 12 additions to the Big 12, the ones that we passed last year in the Senate. Exactly the same. The other big issue for me is the lack of a facility to hold juveniles who are difficult to place. It's put a tremendous strain on the entire system. And I don't know if others of you received this from the State Association. I got that. And in conversations with both Steve Howard and other members of the State Police Association, and visiting my old Depot Street in Bennington, where they're, taking some really difficult kids who shouldn't probably be in the community. And then I heard up north there was a case where a young man was accused of murder and sent home because there was no place for him. And yet I know that one of the others who was there was placed. So that's a priority. It's not a bill, it's just holding the administration accountable to come up with something. And the third priority is S58, which is a bill that we didn't take up last year. It has to do with fentanyl. And a number of cases where fentanyl and can't pronounce the name, but it's an animal tranquilizer that are being used to cut heroin, cocaine, and other drugs, and then sold and creating continued overdose deaths and overdoses. And with the animal tranquilizer, Narcan doesn't work. So it's either catch the person very quickly and do CPR or other medical interventions, or they pass away. So I think we need to look at that. And the fourth priority is actually a bill that came in this morning on bail. I think we have to look at bail. And I know that, Senator, do you have a bill coming in on bail?
Not a new bill. We have the one from last year, but not a new one. I knew you were, so we can have that discussion.
Yeah, the main area is conditions of release and the violations of those conditions for me. But I don't have a problem reforming the bail system per se in terms of who can get bail. I noticed there's a weight of evidence bill. There's a couple of other that Senator Sheen introduced. I think there's a couple of other bills that have to do with that we should take up this year. The House is going to take up expungement ceiling bill first. So it's a priority when they pass it. So I didn't go around.
Sure, thank you. So in no particular order, I'll just start from the top. It's got several priorities as well. To reiterate what you just mentioned, the hold without bail hearing, the standard of evidence for that is one of the bills that I'd like to work on, specifically for 7553A hearings, which are hold without bail hearings. The next is, I don't have the number, but it's a bill for 2 judge positions, which carries with it an appropriation, so it would also go to that committee as well. And along with that is also the Judicial Nominating Board Transparency Bill that Senator Bohosky and I worked
think
on.
the House is gonna take that up first. I'll check with President. I believe he has a similar bill.
Sounds good. And then the Equal Rights Amendment, PR4, is also something I'd like us to at least discuss and see if we could move that forward as well. It has 23 co-sponsors on it. And
Is that Jimmy's?
yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And after that, the harm reduction bill, which is S70, is also something I'd like to
Is that
make
here?
sure we discuss. That's, yes, it should be in here.
The House has a harm reduction bill that's,
It's got a companion to 72.
Might be.
Okay,
Yeah.
because they're voting on that this week, aren't they?
yeah, so it's in appropriations over there now, and they're looking to send it to us very quickly.
Oh, great, then if that's the companion bill, then I think.
Yeah, that'll be a vehicle for us.
And then the other, last one, the project that I've been working on for a couple of years, which is the Defender General Bill, which provides public defenders to all folks, even if the fine is below $1,000, because currently, if you're charged with a misdemeanor and the fine is below $1,000, I believe, you cannot get a public defender. And so there's been pushback from different angles regarding that one, mainly due to staffing and funding, I believe, but it's something I'd like to continue the conversation on and see if it's feasible to pass this year.
For me, ghost guns, the chair mentioned, and that's a big priority for me. The 3D printed kind of ghost gun is one concern. The other concern is unserialized weapons and parts. So kits that you can buy on the internet that include 80% of the gun, lacks just a framework for it, and then someone can get that through other channels, but it would have no traceability. And, I think that's more and more the concern is avoiding background checks on the other end of it, and then on the post-purchase side, being able to trace it if it's used in a crime. So ghost guns, there's a campaign I'm sure everybody's heard of called Make Big Oil Pay. There's nobody out there who doesn't wanna, get resources from the people who caused what we now refer to as climate change.
Well, perhaps the people who caused it are uninterested in that.
Yeah, yes. But what I would say is, as it's been rolling out, I do have some concerns about the campaign and the kind of bill it seems to be asking for, which is a bill that I worry has us stepping into the role of the judiciary. And just declaring that X companies have damaged the state in X ways and they owe us X amount of money. That's something that I associate with the judicial branch to look into past wrongs and assign liability.
Whatever bill we do, and I've seen the draft and the co-sponsor, but I'm also concerned if we, go too far and make it unconstitutional. I think the model is available to us in the work we did on strict liability regarding St. Gobain a few years back, and the negotiations that were on between the Attorney General's office and St. Gobain at the governor's office. I think the way it should work is not a certain dollar amount put in the bill. It's the ability to hold them accountable and let the courts decide what is. So I don't know what, but I think any bill to be constitutional would need to be that way. I don't think you can say, well, big oil owes us $100 million.
I was just gonna mention, I shared that same concern over the summer, when I first heard about it, and then also did a fair amount of research on it, and I have 3 or 4 pages of notes that I can send you that I think address some of the concerns that you're raising on that bill, because I had the same question. It almost seemed like what the bill was asking for was something that's in the realm of the judiciary branch itself, but there's more to it than that, and I won't dive into it right now, but I can provide that.
And I did have, conversations with the Attorney General and Ledge Counsel. And Ledge Counsel seems to think that there's a path to what they call plausible defense. So they're not able to give assurances that such a bill would be successful in court, but they think there's a way that we could plausibly argue. So all the way of saying that's a priority to investigate how we can recoup what we're paying for flood mitigation and all those other deep-pocketed bills. But I do think we need to be really careful about how we proceed. Nobody in the country's done this yet. New York has a bill that's moved through the Senate. So they're further along than we are. I wouldn't personally be troubled if they went first and defended their bill, but we'll have that discussion. The other, you mentioned conditions of release, violations of those. I've been hearing from constituents in the retail community and Chamber of Commerce. They're very concerned about that. So I support that priority of yours, Mr. Chair. And then the other thing is overdose prevention sites. So the harm reduction bill we were just talking about that will come from the House. We'll have legislation about overdose prevention sites as a pilot, and I support that. And I know it's going to have to make a stop here as well as health and welfare. So, that's something I'm hoping we're going to have a robust discussion about. It's not without controversy, but coming from Burlington, I know problems in Bennington, Brattleboro, other communities, Rutland. Those communities are at their wits' end for how are we going to prevent the spike in overdose deaths and the needles that are accumulating in public parks and on the street. And it seems to me, speaking only for myself, that overdose prevention sites has the ability in some ways to reduce those harms. So, I'm hoping we'll get that bill and look it over and have a discussion and vote it out.
I know that Representative Vaughn wants to deal with first on a bill regarding retail theft. I guess you may already be aware of that would allow them to aggregate. So if somebody stole.
But we discussed that, remember, a couple of years ago, and Matt Valeria was absolutely of the opinion that it was unconstitutional. And so maybe they'll take a different path, right? Because I drafted a bill that we were looking at. We took testimony, we did our due diligence, and we decided there wasn't a path forward for that.
Yeah.
But it's this horribly persistent problem that we have to find a way to deal with.
Just back to ghost guns for a second. I don't know what date, but Ben's trying to work with every town on an expert on ghost guns, because they're really not called ghost guns. They're called something else. And Eric felt uncomfortable in being the expert, so we sought some coming someday in January.
Yeah, we talked about it next week.
Hopefully next week, but it might be the week after I offer a couple of dates for that person. Yeah, but describing them is one thing. And when we started the bill, Eric said there's no, you can't use ghost guns as part of the definition because that's not what they are. So we put it in the statement of purpose just so people would know what it was. Anyhow, Senator Norris.
Yes. Thank you. Well, it's good to see everyone again, I think. My concerns after being on the, said with the Chair Sears on the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee is mental health issues and the lack of facilities throughout the state, obviously. But having said that, also is one of my bigger concerns is spending in the state of Vermont. I think that we've been on a spending frenzy here in Montpelier, and anything that comes through, I take a look at whatever else. One of the issues I might be looking at is spending and the cost thereof, and where does that money come from? Because taxation is just not working no more for us. Along with that, bail is a huge issue for me as to how we approach that. I love every time we bring something up, I like to refer to, we have healthy discussions within the committee, and that's always good. We can sit here and respect each other's opinions and so on and so forth, but bail is a big issue. The facilities, once again, is a big issue, and then I guess we can't call them ghost guns no more, but I've been hearing a lot.
Well, you can call them that, it's just that when we write the bill, we can't call them.
Right, so I'm certainly looking forward to that discussion on the ghost guns. So we'll see how we address that. And I'm not gonna say whether I do or don't, because I really don't know enough about them at this point in time. So I think it's a discussion that we need to have. And I do have a bill in, I think it was H-195 today, the president. It was, I see 804A hearsay bill, and we'll discuss that in the legislature. It's really, the laws already exist, it's just putting another addition onto it in reference to people under the age of 16 and under the age of 12. So, and we'll go through that when Winston's here, obviously. But one of my larger concerns is at least the constituents from my county are just, and I've heard things down here also, is they feel as though the members of the legislature have taken the stance that we're too soft on crime. So I'm not saying we're going to be tough on crime, that's not what I'm saying, but the words that I'm getting is that we feel that from what happens to our court system, what's happening now on the streets, bails, whatever else, that the legislature has taken a position that we're too soft on crime.
I'm just clarifying, do you mean that we think we're too soft on crime, or they think we're too soft?
They think that we're too soft on crime in the bills that we're entertaining or passing.
Okay.
And they've clearly you can look through from the Benningtons or North Benningtons up into the St. Albans area as what's happening in the state of Vermont. And they're looking for someone to address these problems. That's how they want to address those, I don't know, but I'll be looking at those bills as they come in to see if in fact they do address. We seem to be very, very concerned about individuals who are taken into custody or who are put into the system, whatever else. And at any given point in time, we tend to overlook victims here in the state of Vermont. And that's always key in my book is listening to victims, see what they have to say about it and getting their input. So once again, it's good to be back. I look forward to our healthy discussions as usual, and we'll go from there.
I look forward to a healthy discussion as well. One of the things that, you know, I hear the same thing. And one of the things that I think causes that perception is the backlog in the court system, where you testified about a 2017 case last year that you were involved in as a police officer, a state trooper, and I don't remember much about 2017, to be honest with you. I could jar my memory, look back at my notes, but I think, and that's next week, we're going to have a joint meeting with House Judiciary on that very issue of the backlog and how we can deal with that, because that is a contributing factor. I think also the perception is that violent minor crime is up. And I don't think the statistics bear that out. What is true is that firearms are being used an awful lot more in crime and violence. Those are concerning to me. But statistically, even around nationally and in Vermont, violent crime and other crimes are actually down. And it obviously, whenever something happens, the media plays it up, and we have social networks like Facebook and Twitter and other places where it makes it look worse than it is. I know there's a page in Bennington called the Bennington Scanner page. Every time there's something happens and the police are called, they report it on the scanner page. You know, then you get these comments. I hear the same comments on that page, definitely, that you're mentioning, Senator. But there was a guy in Bennington with 58 violations. Finally, the court said you have to go to jail because he's not showing up for court hearings on the violations. But 58, and that does frustrate people.
So a lot of the things that I am prioritizing others are as well, like bail reform, sentencing reform, harm reduction. I actually visited, the United States only, overdose prevention center last Friday, and it was pretty eye-opening experience. There's also a recent study that came out specifically looking at the neighborhoods that this OPC, they have 2 sites in New York City, is in, and the decrease in crime in the areas where they are, the decrease in syringe litter. So there's some interesting statistics starting to come out in the United States, and you know there are 200 of these across the world. The first of which was opened in I think Sweden in 1986. So there's plenty of data to support this as a model. So I definitely want to make sure we're looking at holistic approaches that are not criminalization to respond to the opioid crisis. I am also will be introducing a bill around secondary enforcement, looking at certain types of traffic stops that aren't an immediate public safety hazard, not being something someone would be pulled over for. And this is to create safety for both the officer, because traffic stops are one of the most dangerous things for police officers, as well as the occupant of a vehicle. And that's not to say that the person couldn't get a ticket, but it would run their registration and mail it to them, or mail them a notice saying, you know, fix your tail light. But it wouldn't be something that they could be stopped for. I also am introducing a bill that would align our civil rape shield rules with our criminal rules. So currently in the criminal system, you may not use a victim's history or against them, but you can do that in civil court. So in civil court, you might be able to use what the victim was wearing as a way to reduce the settlement. So the jury, I don't know if the jury is actually used in the civil court, or the judge might say, well, that person was dressed in a way that makes them 40% responsible for this rape, so we're gonna take away 40% of the settlement. So this bill would align that, so that's no longer an acceptable practice. It would just be yes or no, they are liable or not. I also have the judicial nominating bill coming forward. I also really like to see us look at how we expand and utilize restorative justice more. You know, our criminal legal system is certainly in need of some transformative change. If incarcerating people were going to make our streets safer, we'd be the safest country in the world. And that's just not true. So I really want to look at holistic approaches to meeting victims' needs, as well as meeting the needs of the people who are engaging in whatever they are engaging in, and looking at how we transform the circumstances so that they have what they need, so that's not the only avenue for them. I don't have a specific bill on that, but I really will be looking at all of our bills with how is this transforming our
The good
system.
news is next Wednesday, it's part of the conversation, and it's something that Representative Lamond also wants to do. So,
Yeah, I am happy to hear that, because you're right, the 2023 data does show that crime is down, and so I really want to make sure we're grounding what we're doing in the data and not just how people feel. And in sort of changing what we've always done, because it's not really working. I also have a civil forfeiture reporting bill coming forward. So a couple of years ago in the House, we passed a bill eliminating civil forfeiture that didn't make it through. This is a scaled down version of that to really look at how is that being used, where is it being used. And then I also have a bill that's got a couple of provisions around getting people who don't really belong incarcerated out. And I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion about who belongs incarcerated, but that bill is meant to try and sort of help with some of the stresses on the system by getting people out of it. I'm sure I have other stuff, but that's what's coming to mind, top of mind.
interesting. It's not widely known, but a nursing home in Bennington has just been sold to a group from Massachusetts that provide the goal of this. There's some controversy obviously about it. The goal of the nursing home would be to have people who are currently incarcerated who actually need nursing home care and are not, because of their physical limitations, are not people with mental health problems, people with substance abuse problems. Their problem is currently it's a 100-bed facility. There are 40 people there currently, and they need to deal with those obviously who are currently there and probably would want to be next to somebody with those types of problems, but they've been fairly successful in Massachusetts. I actually went to a meeting before Christmas with the new owners, and there is some controversy in the neighborhood. There's anytime you try to cite something, but I think it's a positive overall that there might be a place for some of those folks. Obviously, they have long sentences. They're very ill. Last time I was at Springfield, there were 2 people from Bennington I ran into. One was in a wheelchair, the other was in a walker. I don't think they're capable of doing the things that they did 20 years ago, but they're serious and they're crimes, and they were sentenced to long periods of incarceration.
And that would certainly make some of the provisions in my sentencing reform bill easier.
I can't think of the name, and I won't give it to you right now, but it's they have the support of Dale and the state level, the town manager support.
I'm really glad to hear that. That will certainly make aspects of my sentencing reform bill a lot easier, I think, because that's certainly one of the concerns that comes up. And I would assume would drive down the cost of DOC for providing hospice care in our facilities.
They'd be eligible for Medicaid reimbursement, which they're not while they're currently incarcerated. I think you bring up one of the issues that we've asked the Corrections Oversight Committee asked the Health and Welfare Committee and the Healthcare Committee in the House, and Institutional Corrections in the House, to look at WellPath and a contract for healthcare for inmates as well. There's been a lot of complaints there, and no committee has really taken it on. And I know that Representative Emmons and Representative, can't think of the healthcare, are holding a joint hearing next week or the week after.
Speaking of healthcare and Medicaid, do you know if either of the healthcare committee will be looking at applying for the waivers that would allow us to get people who are incarcerated on Medicaid before their release date?
That came up, and I think Commissioner Demmel said they were
Okay,
in the process.
I wasn't sure if legislation was needed or if they could
I
just do
don't
it.
think it is, but I think they're in the process. Only state that's done it, I think. I'm gonna, there's one other state that's already done it, but in California. The other, the forensic facility bill is in health and welfare, but I talked to Senator Lyons. She and I were both on the act for this summer, and the strong majority of the committee supports using that facility. But there's also competency restoration, which is another issue.
And I hope in all of these discussions, we'll look more at the desistance data that we talked so much about last year. I know, if someone's in a wheelchair, they're unlikely to be able to do harm regardless of how serious their crime was. However, there's also a lot of data that just shows that once people reach a certain age, they're unlikely to engage in harmful behavior regardless of how harmful their original behavior was. So I hope we're looking at sort of a holistic picture.
Yeah,
I'll make
that's
sure
one
we're
of the-
listing a holistic
Actually,
picture.
that's one of the questions that I asked people from that company in Bennington was what they would do for somebody like, for example, that needed dialysis. And they said they'd use a local hospital, but that they currently do that for other patients. So they would be able to take people that are on dialysis.
But I also think in my sentencing bill does this, looking at sort of our hospice furlough, just from a cost saving standpoint, if someone's on hospice in the hospital and they need armed guards, but they're unconscious, it just seems like a waste of resources.
Yeah, and one of the things that's troubling the corrections department is they have to use probation officers, particularly from Brattleboro and Springfield, to cover hospitals. And it takes 2 officers in 3 shifts to cover every patient. So those probation officers aren't able to do their job.
We have a lot of work to do.
It's gonna be an interesting, and of course, Senator Baruth will be rushing us out of here. We don't have time to do everything we wanna do.
Well, then we wound up coming back last year, so.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have.
I did forget one thing. I do wanna deal with the interrogation bill that the governor vetoed. And I think we need to hear from the people that were listed in the governor's veto message. It was S6. Good morning, Jay. Happy New Year. S6 bill. S6 was the bill then, and the governor's veto message would contain those groups that were opposed to the bill. That's who we should hear from, as well as supporters. But I'd like to understand why what their opposition was and what we could do to make it better. And well, luckily, Jay, please take the witness seat. And we apologize for the lack of chairs. Somebody stole all the chairs. Yeah. Ben, our new committee assistant, is working very diligently to try to find more chairs.
Talking about that all yesterday.
And that one can go up.
Oh, thank you. That's switched off and I need it. Hi, Ben, welcome. And good morning. Jay Pershing Johnson, Governor's Scott's Legal Counsel. Heather's here, and I'm so happy to see you here. So I'm very honored to be invited to speak a little bit to our priorities for the session, and they're going to relate, obviously, as it relates to this committee, to our criminal justice issues. But I think that I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the work that's being done by our public safety enhancement team, which was the executive branch group that was formed in response to Governor Scott's 10-point community violence prevention plan. And that is an enterprise-wide group that's basically working with communities using sort of the state resources that are located statewide, state AHS facilities, our barracks, and the leadership that we have in those facilities to basically be addressing the issues that we're seeing in our communities with respect to public safety and human services. We know that the two areas cannot be dealt with in isolation. So that our communities are not going to be safer without the adequate provision of the social services to meet the needs of Vermonters who are intersecting with the justice system. We also know that health alone is not going to be enough, and we need enforcement as well, right? We need to balance those two things. So that's what the public safety enhancement team is largely working on, and that's working in, again, like I said, in communities. We started in Bennington, we are working in Springfield, we're beginning an initiative in Brattleboro, but it's basically working with communities who will welcome the effort and who are willing to devote the resources. Something like Rutland's Project Vision is really what it's intended to look like. So in some communities, and all communities are different, some communities are going to be, a lack of more coherent social services. All of them are going to be facing housing deficit and housing needs. So these are the kinds of things that the PSET is working with communities to sort of coordinate and move together onto make communities safer. So I just want to say that we should never forget that while this community operates more or less in isolation, unless it's working across, in a joint hearing, we recognize that these public safety initiatives on their own are never going to be sufficient without adequate service provision. And actually adequately meeting the needs, matching the needs of Vermonters with the services that the state is providing. So the governor's focus this session is going to be on public safety, housing, and affordability. I don't think that's a secret. All are consequential and affect all Vermonters, and without progress, it'll be difficult to address our demographic crisis. As it relates to this committee, in the past year, really, we've heard a lot from constituents, communities, prosecutors, police, legislators about their concerns with rising crime. I know that there may be data to support a rise in crime or a decrease in crime. I guess I would be interested in seeing the data that the committee is seeing, because I think that the perception across the board is that there is an increase in crime, low-level crime. And I know that there's data to support the fact that there is an increase and has been a trending increase in violent crime since about 2007 in Vermont. So that's concerning. And I think that we need to be cognizant of that. And, maybe we need to reach consensus on the data that we're referring to and what sources that we're looking at. We also, as part of the public safety enhancement teamwork, have put together a larger sort of heat map that in January will have been up and running for about a year, and hopefully we will be able to pull some trend data from that. It's very raw data. It's reports from local law enforcement, so it's very raw data. But again, we can see trends from the past year in the heat map, and hopefully in January we can pull some annual data. So we've seen high-profile murders and gun crimes related to drugs and gangs, to persistent, what we like to call low-level crimes, including violations of conditions of release, simple assault, driving-related conduct, disorderly conduct, violations of protection orders, interference with access to emergency services, petty larceny, retail theft, unlawful mischief, unlawful trespass, and the like. These are the crimes that leave community members and local businesses feeling uneasy and unsafe. So again, perhaps it's a perception, but it is a perception that we are hearing from constituents and legislators pretty much statewide. I would imagine this isn't news to most of you. I would imagine you are hearing from your communities about concerns with crime. In mid-December, we convened a public safety community engagement session because we felt like we needed to take a step back and get the right people in the room to discuss what we're hearing from our communities. and reflect on our direction. Our goal was to let Vermonters know that we are hearing them. So we've been to town halls, we're listening in on select board meetings. Crime is often a theme. So we heard generally from, I would say, about 100 people in the room, and that included some legislators, it included police, it included sheriffs and state's attorneys, heads of select boards, mayors, members of the judiciary, including the Chief Justice. And we heard a number of things from the community members who spoke on the panel. A lot of concern with repeat offenders. We hear the terms revolving door and catch and release, soft on crime, those kinds of terms we hear often. We heard the need for collaboration between law enforcement, courts, and healthcare providers. No question, courts are an essential, element of the issues where we can't address any of these, any crimes in a swift fashion. We heard about the need for collaboration among the three branches of government, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. We've heard about some of the drivers of criminal behavior, substance use, mental illness, and co-occurring disorders. We need to be able to say, and I think it's unusual to hear in the State House blunt speak, where people use terms like chaos and gangs. These are terms that community members are faced with, are using every day, and I think that we can't soft pedal some of how people are feeling. We heard how people are perceiving we have all carrots and no sticks, and accountability is non-existent. So I think what we have concluded is we need to focus on balancing the needs of individual offenders with what we're seeing in terms of the impacts on our communities. So of course there's no single quick fix. A lot of these problems have developed over decades. But for this session, our more short-term proposals are they're going to focus on repeat offenses by attempting to roll back bail reforms and addressing repeat violations of conditions of release and other non-compliance with court orders. So I know that one thing that we have heard is sort of the talking point that we can't make any changes to our bail laws because it would be unconstitutional. Well, we did roll back our bail laws in 2018, and our prior laws were not unconstitutional. So some of those changes are having an impact. We believe the $200 cap is having a lot of unforeseen consequences, and I hope that this committee will be open to testimony from the prosecutors and others who are experts in this area. But our laws and our practices, so again, we need to be working with the judiciary to address some of what we're seeing, seem to be sending the message that court appearances just aren't important. We've had over 5,000 arrest warrants for failure to appear during the last year. And this doesn't count.
5,000?
5,000. And that's proceedings. So it doesn't, if there are 21,000 cases, I don't know how many proceedings that would be, but I'm sure that we can get that data. So 5,000 arrest warrants for failures to appear, and this doesn't count continuances that are granted by judges rather than issuing warrants. So, and of course that all adds to the backlog and the delay. We have preliminary data regarding repeat offenders among the 21,000 dockets, which indicates that it's a substantial percentage of the offenders in our system are repeat offenders. So I think that we need to dig in a little bit more on that. And there are a large number, I think probably most of the misdemeanors, or one of the highest numbers of misdemeanors, are violations of conditions of release. So while courts are not imposing bail, they are issuing conditions of release, which are routinely violated. The violation of a condition, regardless of the original crime, is a misdemeanor. So violations of conditions are treated like any other misdemeanor, and they basically are cited and released for abscession, arrest, and release with additional conditions. Part of the problem is the length of the process. If you've committed a misdemeanor crime, and you're living with conditions of release for a couple of years, I mean, there seems to be a basic inequity in that. So we need to talk about how do we expedite those proceedings. Perhaps some kind of civil contempt needs to be more actively implemented. So, so I think those are the kinds of things that we're talking about in terms of bail and violations of conditions. We'd also like to discuss the intersection of drugs and criminal activity, and I was happy to hear Senator Smith say that S58 will be a priority of this committee. So we need to facilitate the prosecution of fentanyl, and we need to do away with the defense of,
Knowing,
I'm sorry?
knowing.
Yes, the knowing offense. So the data we're hearing is fairly alarming. In 2022, 100% of the drugs in glassine bags tested in the Vermont State Police Lab tested positive for fentanyl. Fentanyl seems to be replacing heroin as the opioid of choice. And fentanyl is reportedly cheaper and far more potent and more deadly than heroin. 56% of the drugs tested in the lab include xylazine. So, yeah. And xylazine, of course, has other kinds of health impacts as well. So we know that these drugs are highly addictive. They cause significant harms to families and the children of addicted individuals and our communities. And we need to remember that focus on harm reduction alone fails to balance the needs of the individuals with the needs of our communities. In the short term, we need to do some work to update the drug laws in Title 18. We have, over the years, been pretty consistently updating Title 23 in terms of DUI. We just haven't done that with Title 18 drug laws in probably about 20 years. So S58 is a good start with respect to prosecution of polysubstances, as well as drugs death resulting. We also need to take a look at the demand side that's driving supply. And I think that what we need to do this year is have some conversations about our goals. Our concern is that with an increased emphasis on harm reduction for individuals, we can't lose focus on the harms to our communities and the families of addicted individuals. I wanted to quote Stanford addiction expert Keith Humphreys, who spoke in testimony about Oregon's decriminalization program, which I think is instructive. If Oregon continues on its current path of not complementing effective harm reduction with strong prevention and treatment initiatives, and of focusing harm reduction only on people who use drugs, it should expect rising drug use, addiction, and harms to the communities. If the people of Oregon conclude that those costs are bearable, then of course they have the right to that decision in our democracy. But recent elections in places like San Francisco and Seattle suggest to me, at least, that there is a limit to how much community harm from drug use voters will tolerate in the long term. That means we need treatment and prevention policies that actually reduce drug use, as well as harm reduction programs that recognize the need to protect communities from the harms of drug use. So I think that what we need to do is have thoughtful conversations about how we can think creatively to bring criminal and civil legal processes to bear to incentivize individuals to stop using drugs and get treatment. I mean, without that, we're not going to stop, we're never going to reduce the number of addicted individuals in our communities. And I think that we need to be realistic when we think about harm reduction as a priority. I would say that, I mean, when I think about the issues, DOC facilities are the one place justice-involved individuals can obtain medically assisted treatment on demand. DOC is working on expanding creative treatment and recovery solutions, which I think we need to support. And they've asked for some funding through the opioid settlement funds for that. So I think that we need to be thinking creatively about the resources that we have, about the limits to resources that we face, and we need to think about how to connect individuals more effectively with treatment to stop drug use. We also look forward to continuing the work we started last year in the areas of juvenile justice, forensic facility and competency restoration. And we'll be supporting the effort to expand the Big 12 for transferring juvenile cases to criminal court. We'll also be looking to modify the trigger for raise the age to reflect a realistic readiness test with ongoing reports for progress. And if all we manage to do is push it out one more year, that's something that we have to do regardless. We need to be supporting continued efforts to develop a forensic facility for violent, mentally ill, and developmentally disabled individuals, as well as a competency restoration process, and greater flexibility for the use of involuntary medications for violent forensic patients. I think that this is something that's been flagged by our healthcare community. And I think that it's something that, even though these are difficult conversations to have, we need to be thinking about how to have them. And finally, just to wrap up in terms of the legislation that we are thinking we would like to see move forward, we'd like to see movement on a system of universal sealing versus expungements with access for criminal justice purposes. So this often gets hung up on that issue, who gets access, but I think we need to be talking about the benefits, the collateral consequences, and the fact that if we want to focus on the issues we have with respect to repeat offenses, that universal sealing is a way of getting there. So that's it for, I think, for the package that we would like to see move forward this year.
Well, I'm gonna start with the last and say the good news is the House Judiciary Committee will be taking up sealing and expungement first, and hopefully we can come to some agreement. Yesterday, there was an editorial in the Boston Globe about xylene or Trank, the drug you spoke of, emerging to be an emerging threat to the nation. And it was present in the numbers that you were talking about. So as we look at S58, I hope we can look at that drug as well. Want to raise the age again. The House is probably going to put that in the miscellaneous judiciary bill again, like we did last. I think we put it there last year. But the House is going first on miscellaneous judiciary. If they don't, we can look at that in here when we get to this issue. I don't disagree with most of your priorities and the governor's priorities. I think it is perception that crime is up, and part of that is because I think those crimes that we're seeing today, much more than ever, well, firearms, which heightens people's awareness of the crimes and heightens their fear of what's going on in the streets. And I think substance abuse or abuse and the demand side, I'm glad to hear you talk a little bit about the demand side. Bail absolutely is a priority here. Looking at it from all sides. I believe Illinois did a very thoughtful bill by changing the bail laws to somewhat of a compromise, probably, to, you may know more about Illinois than I do, but my understanding is they hold people accountable for violations of conditions of release, but there is no bail.
There is no cash bail. Illinois did eliminate cash bail.
So anyway, we are definitely going to be looking at bail here. I think several of us mentioned it as a priority. I want to just, in defense of Justice Reinvestment 2, which is where I believe we changed some of the bail laws. The goal was always to hold people accountable for violations, but somehow the accountability got lost, I think. And that's part of the problem. But what we were trying to do back then was try to use alternatives to incarceration, but holding people accountable. For example, saying you will go to drug treatment or you will participate in a drug screening or whatever. But when somebody violates that, we don't do anything. That's part of to me, that's part of the problem. Or, another condition of release, particularly in domestic violence cases, was you stay away from convictions. And when that's violated, the idea was there would be some consequence. But we're not seeing that. And so to me, the consequences and the accountability needs to be there. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be incarcerated. But I found at the time, I believe there was a lot of discussion about the impact of short-term jail sentences. And it was not positive. So if somebody were, for example, to participate in a residential drug treatment program, as a result of the violation of conditions, would probably be much more positive results. However, getting into that program is a difficulty right now. And I'm talking with the people at my local Turning Point Club, for example, they had a woman ready to go. And she couldn't get, the day that she was supposed to leave, they called and said that the bed wasn't available. And they lost her. There's a certain time when somebody's amenable to treatment, and it doesn't last very long sometimes. I want to also, this is pure Bennington, but we don't have a methadone clinic. And the lack of that, I know that Kelly Carroll has been writing to Dr. Levine at the governor's office about it. Whether the holdup is because they need a CON and it's the Green Mountain Care Board or it's BARD itself, but the facility's there, we're ready for it. The community wants it, and we don't have it. And so people are either traveling to Rutland or North Adams, Mass, or Brattleboro. And that's hard on everyone who's trying to get treatment. Final is from my local sheriff. Restock the drug task force. He was a member of the task force back in the day. And it's something that, at least in Southern Vermont, has. I know you've got a huge vacancy problem in the state police, but it would be good to get that restock, re-up to full capacity. I had an interesting conversation with the people from the Justice Center regarding what is the most effective deterrent to crime. And they have a term for it, which I've forgotten already, but it's basically the likelihood of getting caught. If you don't feel that you're going to get caught, you're more likely to commit the crime. So I think one of the priorities should be making sure that we have the full complement of troopers in our local police department too. That's just the likelihood of getting caught for speeding, for example. And I noticed that on the highway on the way up today.
Wow.
There was an unmarked truck that stopped somebody for speeding. And I said, oh, that's going to slow people down because they see an unmarked truck. I thought at first it was the governor's truck with the lights flashing. It's on 89. Time.
I have a couple of questions, and then one thing that sort of came up as you were talking about people who are out in the community living with conditions of release for years. I wonder if it makes sense in those instances if they've lived in the community for the minimum sentence they would be sentenced for to dismiss it. I mean, if they've not picked up another crime, they're living with conditions of release. One way we might be able to decrease the backlog is simply have that dismissed. They've already served their time. And so that came up for me, and I wonder if it's something we can discuss as we are going.
Representative Lamont mentioned that
Yeah, I just, because of the backlog, people are in the community.
You know, next week, next Wednesday, I think we're having a joint hearing.
Perfect.
That's a good.
Perfect.
And then you can identify those cases with no subsequent violations. That would be an interesting thing to consider. It's not something that we put on the table today.
And then I had a couple questions for you. So the public safety enhancement team, what community needs assessments are they utilizing to meet the needs of the communities they're working in?
And what do you mean by that?
How are they evaluating what the community needs?
Oh, we walk into the communities and we meet with the select board, we meet with all of the nonprofits, we talk to the emergency responders, we talk to the police department, we bring them together in groups, we attend public hearings, and what we end up doing eventually is convening a summit where working groups either have previously identified and worked on various specific issues such as housing needs, or and then generally the hub is a huge issue. And then in the summit, or that work is done in breakout sessions during the summit, and then reports are given at the summit. There is, I mean, in the Bennington summit, at least had to be at least, I don't know, 100 people in attendance, and from all across the community. And then there's the discussion, and then we have a convener. Jim Victor is somebody on contract with the Department of Public Safety who's convening these
He
sessions.
just refuses to retire.
He just refuses to
I
retire.
clocked him the other day.
And then he basically continues to work with the community, with the state resources on the ground to ensure that some of this work is being done, that performance metrics are being established and hopefully met. So that's how we do it.
So it's not a standardized evidence-based community needs assessment format. It's more of an organic.
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay.
Is there some sort of form that you'd like to see us fill?
No, there's a bunch of different comprehensive community needs assessment models out there, but it sounds like this is just more of an
It's
organic.
very organic, yes. Community convening.
And then my other question, the crime statistics data that you were giving, where is that coming from? The data that I referenced about crime being down was from the FBI and the community, or the
Oh, that's what I'm
Council
referring
on
to.
Community Justice.
Yes. So the CSG has done some updated numbers for us so we have a snapshot of that data. So that's where we're getting the data.
Would you be willing to share that with us?
Oh, it's public, it's online.
Okay, if you could share the link, that would be great.
I know, I'm sorry to miss you there. I know.
Thank you, first of all, Jay, for the overview. I appreciate it. I agree with the chair. I think many of the priorities make sense, and we can find paths forward on them. It seems to me that we're talking also about additional resources. If what we do involves detaining or incarcerating more individuals, and then the other side of it would be the treatment side, which I think you very rightly say we need to be doing more. So if we put those together, it would seem that the governor's priorities would lead him to increased investments in certain areas. So I know you can't preview the state of the state or the budget, but speaking generally, will we see the governor making larger investments rather than cuts in the areas that we're speaking
The governor's not speaking of cuts in the areas that we're speaking about.
Well, in other words, if I understand every department, I think across the board, are being asked to stay within a 3% inflation target, which basically level funds. So if we're going to pursue these priorities, is the governor prepared to budget more resources than 3%?
Well, I think resources were expanded fairly substantially last year across the board, somewhere from 8 to 12%. So 3%, you may seem level, but I think that's on top of a significant increase last year. I think you have to look at all of this in context. We haven't, with respect to where we are and how we get there, we're obviously looking to conversations with the legislature. And if the time comes where we are quantifying some of the impact, it may or may not increase costs to DOC, and it may or may not increase costs to the public health system, right? I mean, obviously you need a hub in Bennington, but you're also talking about a significant investment in safe injection sites in at least 2 places in Vermont. So I mean, when you're talking about resources and costs, I think you need to be, like I said, focusing on priorities, reaching some consensus about our goals.
Okay, and I'm willing to reframe it along those lines. Would the governor be open to more resources in the areas indicated by his priorities if the consensus is that, for instance, reforming conditions of release and violations of conditions of release leads to more detention and incarceration? Would we be able to work with the governor on increased money for treatment, increased money for Department of Corrections, for instance?
We're gonna have to look at the budget holistically, and I'm sure everybody understands that. We're also looking at healthcare and the kinds of service needs that individuals have. So all of that needs to be balanced, and I think that's what we're talking about is balance.
Yeah, understood. I'm just thinking that to the extent that we agree, the agreement sometimes ends at the budget table. So I'm hoping that the governor, as we work with him on his priorities, he'll understand that when we're in a crisis situation and we need to do things quickly to reduce harm and increase safety, sometimes that costs more than 3% in each given agency that's affected.
I'm sure the governor understands the impacts of the budget.
Okay. Then my other question would be about Newberry. So this is the continuing saga of, in the wake of closing Woodside, there was a favorable decision from the Supreme Court for the administration, for the state. Is it the intention to move forward with that and have youth in those beds in a certain time frame you can talk about?
I am not prepared to talk about it, no. I don't know the timing now that DCF has gotten that decision. It is not the secure facility that it was originally anticipated to be. It's a much more scaled down clinical facility. I don't know the timing on when that's expected to open.
We're supposed to hear Commissioner Winters. I thought it was tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not Commissioner Winters. It's Tyler Allen and Boudreaux are coming tomorrow to talk about that. I believe the plan is for Middlesex to be online sometime this month with 4 beds, and then there's 2 or 3 beds down in Wyndham County at the sheriff's office. It won't be run by the sheriff, but it's the physical location. My understanding, and we should ask tomorrow about that, about their plan. My last recollection was that Middlesex would be about 4 years.
Yeah, you'd have to ask DCF those questions at this point. Yeah.
They have not found a provider, private provider who's willing to take on the Middlesex facility yet. So there's a number of questions about it. Definitely schedule it for tomorrow. So see you aware.
And I think obviously to the extent that we're together addressing public safety, housing, affordability across the board this session, the goal is to address our demographic crisis, right? The issue is the demography of the state. You're not growing the population of prime age workers. You're not growing the population of children in the state. So I think that when we talk about perceptions and crime and housing and all of the costs that you see across the board and what the governor will be willing to commit in any one area, I think we have to be thinking about all of it, again, in a balanced way, with the goal of increasing the number of people and young people in the state.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Jay, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope that
New year to you. Look forward to continuing our work. I think we've identified some of the priorities for us. We may have disagreements on how to get to where we want to go, but we'll work on it together.
appreciate it.
Thank you. So, I think we're gonna adjourn. A little early today. Ben is gonna spend the rest of his day looking for chairs. I don't know who's in charge of chairs.
Sergeant Lance.
Sergeant Barnes, I asked yesterday and I received 2, and I'm trying to get more, so.
We get 2 more tomorrow, we'll, you know.
Thank you.